What is up, guys? Welcome back to another Geekawhat video, and today I've got this Intel's brand new 10-core 20-thread CPU. So why not build a gaming PC for around $3,000? I'm going to run you through all the parts behind me, sort of show you how to put it together, and then boot it up to see exactly how it performs a little bit later. Without any further ado though, let's jump into it. We're going to kick things off as always with our motherboard, RAM and our CPU. And if you aren't already following me on Instagram, I'll link that below as well. For the CPU, I selected Intel's brand new Core i9-10900K with 10 cores and 20 threads and a boost clock of up to 5.3 GHz on a couple of the cores. It's the fastest gaming CPU on the market right now. The motherboard I selected is MSI's MPG Z490. This board builds upon their Carbon lineup's reputation for providing all the features of the higher end chipset without costing like $500 or $600. It's got all the features we need, including a couple of M.2 slots, the socket that supports our CPU. We'll also find built-in Wi-Fi, a 2.5 gigabit Ethernet port, which is pretty useful, and then also 3 10 gigabit USB ports. Installing our CPU is pretty easy. Take note of where the triangle is here, and then pull the arm out to the side and up. Lift the socket cover, but don't take the plastic off. Then find the golden triangle on your CPU, mine is here, and line that up with the one we remembered from a moment ago. That will then sit nicely. It will wiggle slightly, but you shouldn't have to force it downwards. Then take the socket arm back, the black cover will pop off, and this will require a bit more pressure than an AMD CPU, but still nothing too major. We're next going to install our RAM, and this is from Thermaltake. It's their Tough RAM RGB. I'd recommend if you're building this system, you pick up 2 kits of this to give you 32 gigabytes of really super quick memory. Pull back the 2nd and 4th clips on our motherboard RAM slots, and find the notch in the center of your RAM DIMM. Line that up with the equivalent notch on your motherboard and simply slide the RAM into place, providing sort of even pressure with both fingers. You'll then see the kind of Thermaltake logo sits at the top of the memory. I'm then going to take our M.2 drive, and this is Adata's Spectrix S40G. Available in a range of capacities, I'd recommend either 500 gigabytes or 1 terabytes for use in this build. It's also got RGB up top, which is going to look insane when this build is done. We then need to remove these 2 screws from this M.2 kind of heatsink at the top here, including that bit of plastic. Usually, MSI would recommend you keep this on for like extra heat dissipation, but because this is RGB and doesn't run too hot anyway, I'm gonna leave it on. Then remove this screw on our M.2 standoff before sliding the M.2 into place and fastening the screw back down just like so, and that's going to look so good when it's all turned on. Next up, we're going to do a bit of prep for installing our CPU cooler later. Take this bag of mounting hardware from the box alongside this bag of mounting hardware screws and pop the cooler to one side. We're going to use this to make sure our water block can slot straight on as soon as it's in the case. If you're putting together an Intel build, you're going to need these 2 bits rather than these ones, which are for AMD CPUs. We're then going to take the plastic back plate and slot this through the back of the motherboard around the 4 holes of our CPU. You then want to take 4 of these, which are like a standoff between the back plate and our CPU cooler, and just screw these in. Trust me when I say this is going to be a lot easier now than if you were to do it a bit later on. Finally, we're going to loosely secure these thumb screws onto the top, and that means we've got everything prepared for a little bit later. This build just got utterly insane. This is the case I've opted to go for with this build, and I promise it actually looks bigger on camera than it actually is. But this is Thermaltake's View 51. I'm going to take the glass side panel off first and store that nice and safely down there. I'm going to talk a little bit more about our case as we go, but for now let's install our motherboard. This board actually has like a pre-built-in, there's a peel, has a pre-built-in I/O shield, so it can literally just slot straight in and screw onto the standoffs. With our motherboard in, our case is, I hope, starting to look a bit more full up. Next up, I'm going to install our CPU cooler, as I said before. This new Intel chip's pretty great, but it runs hot, which means you need a pretty beefy cooling solution. I'm going to install the fans first off onto the top of the cooler before proceeding and actually screwing it here in our case. So it will actually kind of sit horizontally and be on show and look fantastic. To secure our CPU cooler into place, I've spun the case around and grab these small screws and washers from our CPU cooler box. The next bit's a bit of a balancing act, but you'll kind of see what I mean. Okay, I've got to say, this is starting to look so sick. The next thing I'm going to do is take off the 4 thumb screws from a moment ago and actually install our CPU water block. It comes with thermal paste pre-applied, so no need to apply your own. It's a simple case of securing it down and screwing it on. Okay then, before we actually get our power supply and our graphics card and stuff installed, I'm going to do some of our kind of front panel headers, our USB headers now, while they're still easy to access. First is our USB 3 cable. This one is keyed, meaning it will only go in one way and is a little bit delicate. Next up are our HD audio and USB 2 headers. They look very similar with a pin blocked out and plug into the bottom left and kind of center left of our motherboard. Finally then, we've got our front panel cables which look like this, and I'm going to pop a diagram on your screen now to help you kind of follow along as easy as possible. Don't worry if you get these the wrong way around, nothing's going to explode, your system just won't turn on and you just got to rearrange them later. With those cables sorted, the next step is to install our graphics card, and I'm very excited about this one. Now, you can get either the 2080 Super or 2080 Ti. I know this build isn't all about value, but the 2080 Super is more than enough for me. And this MSI card, wait for it, looks absolutely insane. Now, what is even better about this build is that this Thermaltake case has like a horizontal or vertical PCIe layout. You can pick and choose as you wish, which means with one of these, which extends our PCIe slot, we're going to mount this horizontally. No, vertically. We're going to mount it vertically. And with that fastened back in place, we simply remove this little plastic cover, pull back the clip on our second PCIe slot, because I think that might look tidier, and slot that in just as though it was a normal graphics card. Then take your graphics card you are going to use and line that up with the slot cover here, so you know which of the black ones to remove from the rear. And you can actually move this forward or back as well if you've got multiple cards or you want to prioritize looks or airflow. It's all up to you. Okay then, the system's really coming together and looks sick. Before we actually cable manage this, and then boot it up to play some games and see how it looks, we need to pop in our power supply. This is the Thermaltake Tough Power GF1. It's got 850 watts of super clean 80+ gold certified energy output, and it's going to work well for this build. And then if there wasn't already enough RGB, I'm going to throw in a couple of RGB power supply extension cables, which I'll also link in the description below. Oh, look at that! From this bag of modular cables, you want to grab your 20+4 pin motherboard power cable, a couple of SATA power harnesses. That's going to power up like our RGB controller and any hard drive or SSDs. We then want to grab a dual 6+2 pin graphics power card cable, as well as an 8-pin CPU power cable. The rest of these you can look after for safekeeping later and will allow you to add extra components or upgrade your existing components without needing to change the power supply. Hashtag pro tip. With the PSU in, we just need to run literally 3 cables. The first is our CPU power cable, and this plugs in to the 4+4 pin header at the top of our motherboard. Next up is our 6+2 pin dual GPU power cable, and that's going to go into this extension, which will then plug into our graphics card. Before finally clipping in the biggest power cable of the bunch, the 20+4 pin cable, which is going to juice up our motherboard. And I think we're done. I mean, I'm completely out of breath, but this thing looks insane. Let's whack these side panels on, boot it up, and see how it looks before jumping in to some gaming benchmarks to see exactly how it performs. Roll the montage.
Maybe I'm too old now, or just afraid that you'll walk away.
Okay then, now that we've put this system together and seen how good it looks when it's all powered up, I think it looks amazing with all that RGB. I know like one person will disagree in the comments below. Let's now see how it performs. Before jumping into the usual list of games, I'm going to start off with some CPU and whole system benchmarks. Cinebench R20, we're looking around 6,150, which puts it up there with some of the most powerful CPUs on the market, and also means that it's one of the most powerful CPUs on a consumer-grade platform, aka you don't have to pick up a Threadripper or server socket type in order to kind of use this CPU. Next up is 3D Mark's Time Spy. It is of course a DirectX 12 benchmark, so that means it's more graphical, but it will give us some separate scores and be a good overall system test. Here we're looking over 11,000 for our combined score. 3D Mark's Firestrike is the DX11 and kind of whole system counterpart, and here we're seeing nearly 23,000, which is bonkers. It makes it kind of in the top percentage points of all systems ever tested with 3D Mark. Moving on to our kind of gaming titles now, the first on the list is Apex Legends. 4K, medium to high settings, we're seeing 80 plus FPS. Graphically it looks incredible, and I've said it before, I'll say it again, 4K gaming is something else. The step up from 1080 to 1440p is very noticeable. 1440p to 4K is like, it's like getting a whole new set of eyeballs, or some new glasses, but I haven't ever worn glasses. Anyway, I digress. The game looks incredible, and at 80 plus frames per second, it's top notch. Another game that's top notch and looks incredible is Battlefield 5. I've never actually played this map before, that's kind of by the seaside as we'd call it over here in the UK. 4K medium settings, RTX on, that of course gives us a big performance hit but kind of visual uplift. We're seeing around 70 frames per second. The next game to also have RTX enabled is Call of Duty's Warzone. 4K high settings with RTX on, we're looking 55 to 65 FPS. I love Call of Duty Warzone at the minute. I'll be honest with you, I'm watching far too much Nadeshot as opposed to playing it, which is perhaps where I'm going a bit wrong, but either way it is killer. The next game today is Forza Horizon 4. I of course use the inbuilt gaming benchmark as I very often do, and at 4K ultra settings that gave us around about 90 frames per second. If you jump down to 1440p you render in way less pixels and you'll get a much bigger frame rate uplift. But for a game like Forza Horizon 4, which is a racing title anyway after all, this, in my opinion, is the best way to play it. GTA 5 is the next title today, and here at 4K high settings, we're looking around the 60, 70 plus frames per second mark. As you can see from the full settings overview before each game, I did turn down some of the extended render distance settings with this game because that is going to give us a really nice playable frame rate. 1440p you'll look well above 100 FPS, but as I said, it looks incredible at 4K. The next game on my list is Overwatch. Been loving Overwatch recently, I've said that in a good few videos now, and at 4K ultra settings we're looking around about 150 frames per second, which is bonkers. I mean, the fact that you can build a gaming PC nowadays and run it 4K ultra and get 150 FPS is utterly bonkers. I also want to give a big shout out to MSI at this stage of the video, who hooked it up with this curved 4K gaming monitor, which allowed me to benchmark all these games here at their rightful 4K resolution. They also kindly sent this kind of low profile mechanical keyboard to match as well, and I'll link all of these in the description below. The penultimate game today is CSGO. A few of you are going to be going, James, why are you testing CSGO? This system's like stupidly powerful and CSGO is really easy to run. You're very right, but people asked for it, so here goes nothing. 4K, very high settings, 200 plus frames per second. So yes, it can run CSGO. The final game today is Project Cars 2, 4K, high settings, we're looking around about 60 FPS. If you turn down some of the reflection and anti-alias settings, you'll get a much higher degree of frame rate, but because it's a racing game, 40-45 is kind of actually an acceptable level, and is what a lot of the consoles run these racing games at. So the fact we can stick to the 60-ish mark means these settings are a good choice for me. With that being said though, I think that pretty much wraps it up for today's video. If you did enjoy it, make sure to give it, you guessed it, a big old like rating and get subscribed for our next video. Thank you very much for watching and we'll see you in the next one.